Week 7 in the fantasy football season. Here's the top 15 tight ends I'm ranking this week. Number 1, Brock Bowers. The Las Vegas Raiders now with Adams out of the picture for good, traded to the New York Jets. Brock Bowers, he's going to be the number 1 target, which he's been over the last few weeks when Adams has been out with the hamstring injury. But now it's obviously confirmed with Adams gone to the Jets. And Brock Bowers, he's a matchup problem. Safeties, linebackers, they can't cover him one-on-one. He's got great yard after catch ability. And this week at the Los Angeles Ram team, where they're weak at the linebacker position, I think Brock Bowers can have his way. And if they're trailing early and often, he's going to get a lot of targets. We saw it the last couple weeks, and we're going to continue to see it. And Brock Bowers is up there. League lead is at the tight end position. And every stat or two, George Kittle of the San Francisco 49ers. What a great year it's been for George Kittle. 2 weeks in a row finding the end zone. This week a tough matchup, no doubt about it, versus the Kansas City Chiefs. But I believe he's a tight end as well that no one could cover him for the most part. And when he's healthy, we've seen him on top at the tight end position for many seasons. So he's been healthy for the most part this season. I know he missed one game, was George Kittle. But now versus Kansas City Chief team, you know they want revenge, and vengeance is the San Francisco 49er team. And I believe he's the number 1 option so far in the passing game, where him and Brock Purdy are locked in. Number 3, Travis Kelce of the Kansas City Chiefs. I believe he's the number 1 option in the passing game now for Kansas City, where Rashee Rice out for the season, where he was the number 1 guy. And not much going on at the receiving room. Juju Smith-Schuster now stepping in. Xavier Worthy, Sky Moore, Justin Watson, those are the guys left pretty much in that receiving room for this Chief team. Mecole Hardman. And obviously Travis Kelce's better than all those players, even at 35 years old and maybe on a little bit of the decline. His numbers are going to take a hit, which they've done so far. But this week at San Francisco, a team he's had a good track record against, especially in 2 Super Bowl appearances over the last few seasons. I think in a game where Kansas City, I know they're 5-0 on the year, but still want to prove they're a top team in this league. Go in there, and the game plan on the offense is going to run through Travis Kelce, and he has another nice performance. Number 4, Trey McBride of the Arizona Cardinals. Trey McBride last week, his best game of the year, over 90 yards. And if Marvin Harrison is out in this game, he's going to get peppered with targets early and often. It's a pretty decent matchup versus the Los Angeles Chargers. I know their defense has been pretty decent this year, but still leaky in the middle of the field. And Trey McBride's a matchup problem as well, like a Brock Bowers. Safeties, linebackers, they really can't cover him with his size, his route running ability, and yard after catch ability as well. And just the volume he's getting weekly, he's a top 5 option. Worst case, number 5, Evan Ingram of the Jacksonville Jaguars. I said last week, take a wait-and-see approach with Ingram. Saw what Ingram did, 10 for 102 with a fumble loss last week. And with him in this lineup, Trevor Lawrence has more confidence. He's been a target machine last season, over 100 catches, which is a huge number at the tight end position. I know last season Brian Thomas and Gabe Davis weren't there, but I think it matters in this offense. Ingram's going to get his targets. He's going to get his looks. And this week in a good matchup in London with New England coming in, I think Evan Ingram goes out there once again and has a good game. Like I said, he's a tight end that can line up in the seam, line up on the outside, and he's just one of the better athletic tight ends in the league. Number 6, Sam Laporta of the Detroit Lions. Definitely a big hit his numbers have taken this season. Not a lot of targets for Laporta. And actually, I don't think he's 100% as well with the ankle injury. I know he had it a few weeks ago, then they had the bye. Last week, though, only 1 catch. I know it was a big one, 52-yard touchdown at the Dallas Cowboys. But this week, a tough matchup with the Minnesota Vikings, one of the better defenses in the league. And also, like I said, the targets are now with Jameson Williams is the number 2 option in the passing game this season for this Detroit Lions team. But Laporta still could make plays. He still could get open, but just where he was taken, ADP-wise, late 2nd, early 3rd round, and the first tight end off the board in most fantasy leagues. He's definitely been a bust, but still anywhere from a top 5-8 option, in my opinion, weekly. Number 7, Kyle Pitts, Atlanta Falcons. So this Falcon offense is picking it up over the last 2 weeks, especially in the passing game. Kyle Pitts now 2 weeks in a row, double-digit fantasy points, where he was down a little bit in week 3 and week 4. But now week 5 and 6, like I said, double-digit games. This week, a good matchup versus the Seahawks. They can't stop anyone. We've seen it the last few weeks. George Kittle a touchdown versus Seahawks defense. And Sam Laporta had a big game in week 5 as well versus Seattle. So what a good matchup, and him and Kirk Cousins building rapport. And he's making plays as Pitts. He's definitely moved up the last couple weeks. Number 8, Mark Andrews of the Baltimore Ravens. So he's moved up the rankings as well as Mark Andrews. And Harbaugh was right. Andrews is going to have some big games coming up in the next few weeks. And now the last 2 weeks, he's gone out there at 9 or more fantasy points in PPR leagues. And last week was the big game for Andrews, 3 for 66 and a touchdown in the victory versus the Commanders. And Mark Andrews, it doesn't take much for him to put up fantasy points. I believe he wasn't 100% coming into the season with the leg injury. We saw Isaiah Likely get a lot of targets early on, but now Mark Andrews taking back the spot at the tight end position, and him and Lamar always had a great rapport. He's got a knack for the end zone, and he's a good yard after catch tight end. So like I said, he had a hiccup for the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season, but the last 2 weeks he's starting to put up numbers, and this week in a potential shootout at Tampa Bay on Monday night, I think Andrews has another good performance. Number 9, Dalton Kincaid of the Buffalo Bills. So Kincaid, for the most part, he's been a pretty decent tight end. It's been a weak position all season long. Kincaid's that tight end. They'll have one good game, one bad game, and last week had a double-digit performance at the New York Jets, 6 for 51. But now with Amari Cooper in the lineup, obviously some targets are going to be taken away from Kincaid. He's most likely the number 2, maybe 3 option, depending how they use Khalil Shakir in this offense as well as Buffalo, with obviously Amari Cooper being the number 1 target once he picks up the playbook 100%. But this week in a tougher matchup versus Tennessee, I believe it's going to be one of those pedestrian games for Kincaid where he'll be in that range, 7 to 10 fantasy points, but nothing above that. Number 10, Tucker Kraft of the Green Bay Packers. Kraft had some big weeks in Week 4 and Week 5, 17 points in that Week 4 game for Tucker Kraft versus the Minnesota Vikings. And then Week 5, he had a monster performance in that one. 24 fantasy points for Tucker Kraft. But last week, 3.5 fantasy points. I know the weather conditions weren't great, and all the receivers had their games. Like I said, Romeo Doubs, 2 touchdowns. Christian Watson, a touchdown. Jaden Reed, a touchdown. And Tucker Kraft was the odd man out that week. But every week, it's someone different for this Green Bay Packer team. So this week with Houston coming to town, I believe they're going to have to throw the football a whole lot. And this definitely could be a mini shootout in Lambeau Field. Number 11, Pat Freiermuth of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So it looks like Justin Fields is out at quarterback, and I don't agree with the decision. He went 4-2, and Fields only had 1 interception this season as well. So Freiermuth and Fields, they were on the same page for the most part. I know the last couple games the numbers have dropped off for Freiermuth. Now Russell Wilson stepping into the starting lineup for this Pittsburgh Steelers team. And Wilson, we know he's always liked targeting the tight end. Going back to his days with the Seattle Seahawks, Jimmy Graham a couple seasons, had some nice seasons. We saw it last season in Denver at times. Adam Trautman, Greg Dulcich have some decent games. And this week versus the New York Jets, this Pittsburgh Steelers team, we'll see if they want to exploit the Jets in a different way, because we know Sauce Gardner is going to be on George Pickens. And maybe this is a game where it's a Freiermuth type of ball game in the passing game, because no one else has really stepped up in the passing game. Calvin Austin had the one big pop game. He hasn't done much. Roman Wilson, we really haven't seen much out of him. And Jalen Warren's pretty much been a non-factor with injury and inconsistent play out of the backfield. So I think Freiermuth this week could be in line for a big target share. Number 12, David Njoku of the Cleveland Browns. David Njoku now, he's going to move up in the pecking order in this offense with Amari Cooper traded off to the Buffalo Bills. And David Njoku, one of the more athletic and good route runners in the league. But Deshaun Watson's been one of the worst quarterbacks in the league over the last few seasons, and the rapport definitely hasn't been there. But we saw it last season when Njoku, towards the end of the year, him and Joe Flacco were hitting on all cylinders. But this season, it hasn't come to fruition with Watson. But like I said, now with Amari Cooper gone, targets are going to open up in this offense, and I think David Njoku could possibly be the number 1 target in the passing game. It's either him or Jerry Jeudy, but I believe Njoku, the leader in targets in this offense. 13, Zach Ertz of the Washington Commanders. Zach Ertz, last week, another solid performance. He's the number 2 target in this passing game behind Terry McLaurin. Luke McCaffrey really hasn't done much. I know Noah Brown has showed flashes here and there in Zacchaeus, but I think Zach Ertz, good route runner still. I know up there in age, in his mid-30s, and obviously that's when you really start to decline. But with his route running ability and his IQ, and I always say this, a young quarterback's best friend and security blanket is a tight end position. I think Zach Ertz, he's a decent option weekly in those 12-14 team leagues. And this week with a good matchup versus the Panthers that can't stop anyone, I think he goes out there and has a good performance. 14, Cade Otton of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Otton found the end zone last week. But besides that, the numbers were down. And it's tough in an offense with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin to be a consistent fantasy option. So this week in a potential shootout versus a Baltimore defense that's had trouble stopping teams at times this season, in a few shootouts so far in the first 6 weeks of the season. I think Cade Otton could go out there and be a back-end serviceable option. In the 15th and final tight end I'm ranking this week, Hunter Henry of the New England Patriots. So Henry looked good last week with Drake May making his debut. 3 catches, 41 yards, and a touchdown. I know some of that ball game was garbage time, obviously, where they lost 41-21 was this New England Patriot team, but at least Drake May could get the football down the field. And we know Hunter Henry, he likes to run those crossing routes and in the seam routes where Drake May has a stronger arm than a Jacoby Brissett. This Jacksonville defense we know can't stop anyone, and we saw last week Cole Kmet go off for a big ball game with 2 touchdowns. So I think Hunter Henry is going to start making his way up the rankings weekly, and this week in a pretty decent matchup at the Jaguars in London, he could be a nice option for fantasy owners, even though I got him at 15, so that's the top 15 tight ends I'm ranking for week 7 of the fantasy football season.